Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning in today and listening. So, today I'm going to talk about the existence of different traditions and faiths or religions within the world and how we can conciliate that so that everyone can learn to live together, right? And understanding that there are a couple core principles that can be applied here, and maybe this will help people live together in peace, harmony, prosperity, putting these things into this perspective. So, as we know, different beliefs, traditions, faiths have led to conflicts of opinion, which have taken different forms between people who practice these faiths or traditions. And essentially, what this comes down to is seeing things in different ways, right? And in this video, I wanted to create this video to express how, whether we're talking about Judaism, Islam, you know, the Christian faith, or any other faith, how in a way, and I think it's more than in a way, in the way, right? They were all created by God, right? So all these faiths imply or involve a belief in God, right? In one God. Okay, some faiths might have different. For example, when you look at Hinduism, might have different manifestations of God. Okay, but fundamentally, it comes down to the belief that there's one God. Okay, or if you want, one first God who created, right? Creation. So one of the first things to think about is, and I put it in this way, in is it not logical to understand that all of creation was created by God, right? So God created all the possibilities for the past, the present, and the future, right? So is it not correct to say that God, in a sense, created all of the religions? Okay, so I'll invite you to think about that. Okay, or all the traditions, all the faiths, right? As He created the possibility for us to create them, in a sense. Now I'm going to talk about this perspective. How can you say you believe in God, but not believe or respect parts of creation that He created? Okay? So, since God created all of creation, how can you say, uh, I think this part is better than another part? Are they not all, in a sense, facets, different facets of the same jewel? Now, when we looked at conflicts, what we notice essentially is most of the conflicts are based on space, right? So, we want that space, okay? Or we want to determine how people will live and grow within that space, okay? However, is it not also important to remember that God created all the space and created everyone that inhabits it, right? So, if God created that space and created the people that inhabit it, is it not maybe in a way illogical to say we as humans should determine who should occupy that space, how they should live within it, and how they should grow within it? And is it also not a way of believing in God to support that everybody should be allowed their space, right? In some of my previous videos, I've discussed, for example, the concept of conversion versus alliance. Okay. Um, Understanding that everyone was created by God, that everything was created by God. Okay. Which is a concept that we find in most of the major religions or faiths or traditions. Okay. How can we say that part of creation is not correct? or that way of seeing things is not correct? Was it not created by God? What we can see is there are some ways of seeing things that are closer to who we are, or closer to where we are at a present moment. And is not that way of seeing things as valuable as another way of seeing things, since they were both created by God? And when we start thinking in these ways, we realize that it's not about converting someone to our way of thinking. It's about recognizing that another way of thinking is another facet of the jewel of God's creation, and is equally as valuable as ours. And that every facet has its space, and we should respect the facet of every space of that jewel. And we should let it shine brightly, to grow brightly, as we would want every facet of God's creation to be allowed to flourish in the way that He created it, that He allows it to flourish by the possibilities of its evolution in the future. And when we start thinking in these terms, we see that all these conflicts we have, all these differences of opinion, or all these situations where we say we should have that space, or you can't be in that space, we realize that it's also important to allow God's creation to flourish within its different individual spaces. And that's part of showing love for God, right? To say, God, we accept your creation in all its different facets, in all its different ways of manifesting itself. And we support its growth in all these different facets. And when we start looking at things that way, we realize it doesn't make sense to say our way of thinking is better than yours. Our way of thinking might be different, but both were created by God. Right? Now, there are some things that are not acceptable, like hurting others. And although the possibility for those things were created by God, that's the possibility that He gave us to grow in our spaces, in our facets, if you will, with freedom. The freedom to make our decisions in life. But that doesn't mean we need to make the bad decisions. Is not loving God and accepting His love for us choosing to make the right decisions? And if God created this creation, should we not support that creation as we create it from within it, in our way, or help in its creation, help in its development, help in its growth, as we are, in a sense, developers in our way under this creation that He, in a sense, created and manages? So when we look at things in this way, all religions, all faiths, all traditions, all people are all valuable, and all have very important things to find and discover within them. So, understanding that everything was created in God's creation, when we're looking to understand the truth of all things, or to grow, should we not consider also looking at other people's way of thinking and seeing things, right? Because when we limit our perspective, if you will, to our way of seeing things or our current way of seeing things, we close ourselves up to understanding the greater creation of God and seeing how it's all linked and all comes together. That's why this tradition that I founded, Zenwara, is based on all the faiths, all the traditions, all the religions of this world and creation. Because we see that it's based on creation. It's based on understanding that there can be a pursuit of the truth of creation, and that the keys, the answers, if you will, to our personal growth and to what can guide us in that growth can be found everywhere. So it's important to understand that if the keys can be found everywhere, we don't want to snuff out what is found, for example, beside us. We want to realize what is found beside us is as valuable as what is within us, or where we currently are. And if everyone was created by God, which is the case, and we can talk about different levels of existence, understanding that we live within a computer. In my previous videos discussed this and how you can go find this out for yourself. We realize that we're all one, right? We all have our individuality, but we're all one in the sense that we all exist within this creation. So why would you say this part of creation is more valuable or more correct than another part of creation? The answer is that all of creation is valuable. All of creation is important. Sometimes people make bad decisions. Sometimes they make good decisions. And you can hope for as many good decisions as you want. And good decisions are based on a sound mind and a good heart. And when we realize this, we realize we must allow people to flourish within their space. First of all, we must allow them to have their space. And we must also say, we believe in supporting that you should have your space, and that you should be allowed to flourish and grow in your own way within your space. And this kind of relates to the concept I've discussed that, in an ideal world, everyone says, I will never attack again. And I will defend everyone. And I hope that everyone will say, I will never attack again. And in a situation where everyone embraces that way of living, that way of thinking, there is no more conflict. And we realize, and I hope you may have listened to some of my previous videos, and I invite you to listen to them if you haven't. You'll realize how Zenwara and its teachings are the teachings we find within all of creation, within all these different faiths and traditions, right? Because the keys are everywhere. The keys are in Islam. The keys are in Christian faith. The keys are in Judaism. The keys are everywhere. The truth is everywhere, right? Or elements of the truth. And what's important is to learn to open your horizon in life. Not to have a closed way of seeing things, a closed way of thinking. And to realize, why do I open myself up? Because I realize that everything is God's creation. And if everything is God's creation, everything is valuable. So why would I reject parts of God's creation? Right? Why did God create the possibility for all these traditions, all these different faiths, all these different ways of thinking? Maybe it's to allow us to think about things in different ways. Maybe it's a way of allowing us to come together through having these truths in all these faiths and religions and traditions, and realize, there's valuable things there too. And when you have to go find different valuable things in different places, it kind of brings you together with those different places and the people that are within them too. Don't you think God would have created a world where you would have hoped that everyone could come together and live in peace and harmony and prosperity? That's part of the journey. That's part of growing in our space and within ourselves and realizing this is true. God created everything. Is everything else, apart from what's necessarily me or within my space, not also valuable? And if everything is valuable, are there not things that can be learned there? Is it not important to safeguard all those things and places and people just as much as it's important to safeguard my way of thinking or my place or myself? Is it not important to care for all of God's creation and to show love for it in accepting it and all its facets? And that's how I can say today in this video that all faiths, all traditions, all way of seeing things are all valuable, right? They were all created by God. And when you're going in pursuit of furthering your development on the spiritual path, don't limit yourself to one way of thinking. You can if you choose to. And that's your way and your choice to grow in your way. But my suggestion is learn to see the whole picture. Because if you want to understand something in its whole, you have to look at the whole picture. If not, you'll just understand one facet or have knowledge of one facet. So I really hope we can learn as a people everywhere to get beyond our differences, but to remember our differences, to remember that's what makes us unique. But it's not necessarily what needs to separate us or divide us. It can also be what brings us together, as we can learn to share those differences with whoever might want to have those differences shared with them. Not imposing our differences on others, or imposing our way of seeing things or of believing things on others, but in offering it in a way and saying, look, we've grown and we have this wonderful way of seeing things and believing things. I'll give some examples. We have the Torah. We have these wonderful teachings of Judaism. We have the Quran. We have these wonderful teachings of Islam. Okay? We have the Guru Granth Sahib. Okay? Right? We have the Bible. We have all these wonderful ways of seeing things, all this wonderful history, all these wonderful teachings, all these wonderful words of prophets and people who have received guidance from above. We have these wonderful texts like the Kala Chakra texts. Okay, we have all these texts on Buddhism. We have all these wonderful texts from Hinduism, right? We have all these wonderful, wonderful, all this rich history, all this rich work, in a sense, of God and of ourselves who manifested it in the physical world as part of God's design. And we can say there's some things that, we don't want to see. We don't want to see violence. Well, we have history of violence, and we have history that shows how horrible the consequences of that violence was. And we have history that shows us, for example, if no one attacks, there was no war. History of how wonderful things can be. right? And when we conserve all these things within ourselves, we allow them to be there for whoever might come and seek for them, right? So in a sense, we're all guardians and developers of God's creation, right? So let's learn to get beyond these pay differences and see these things that have divided us in the past are actually the things that should unite us. In an alliance between all faiths, all traditions, all nations, one day all planets that have life, all people, whether they be humans or of another species. Remembering that we're all part of God's creation and that every element is valuable and every element should have its space to grow. There are some things that should not be allowed to grow. And those are the things that are contrary to the human heart. That doesn't mean you have to snuff them out. That means you have to teach them, in a sense. Share with them. Or allow, for example, everything that you've learned in your space, such as how the world truly can be a beautiful place, and share that with them. And allow them to grow within their space. Allow them to have their space, to grow, to flourish into who they can be. Now we can have the other side of the medal. There's criminals that do horrible things. Why do criminals do horrible things? Were they born evil? Were they born bad? Things led to a place where they became bad. Okay? And in a situation where they just can't play with others, they just can't live with others, well, sorry, you're going to have to be put in your corner, right? You're hurting others. Hurting others is not acceptable. And we hope that one day, by giving everyone the tools to grow in a beautiful way from the very beginning, there will be less and less of that. We have to learn to forgive others and forgive ourselves. But I'm getting off topic here. Or am I? We have to learn to respect everyone's space, to allow everyone to have their space and to grow as they would grow or as they choose to grow within their space. That doesn't mean you have to get along with everybody all the time, right? But you have to give them that chance. They are part of God's creation. There's a reason why they're there. Maybe it's to teach you things about yourself. Maybe you reflect on what's going on with them and it teaches you in a way. Maybe one day you'll need them to help you. For example, maybe one day, I'll give a very simple example. Maybe you don't like your neighbor where you live. He has a different faith or a different tradition or a different way of seeing things. Okay? You don't get along. But one day, your car gets stuck or needs a boost. Stuck on the ice, you can't move it, or it needs a boost. Well, maybe your neighbor will be there to help you. Or vice versa. If you had taken their space of your neighbor, said, oh, you can't live here anymore, there would have been no one there to help you. Maybe your neighbor is going to develop a cure to a disease that you will be diagnosed with in a couple of years. You didn't realize your neighbor was your best friend, even though you didn't get along at one point. It's not always easy to navigate these questions and navigate these things, but we have to think about them and realize we're all part of God's creation. So we have to understand that we should love all of God's creation, and that includes loving our neighbor and allowing them to grow in their way and to have their space to grow within. Okay? And when you look at what brings, for example, all the faiths and traditions together, all the religions together, you realize there's a commonality. We believe in God. Right? So that's a good stepping stone. Because when you say you believe in God, you believe that God created the world and creation. That's a good stepping stone right there. And how can you not love what God has created if you love God or believe in God? How can you not believe? I'll change that word. How can you not believe in what God has created? And believing in someone or believing in a group of people, for example, is sometimes taking, it's taking a step back and saying, I'll allow you to grow in your way. I'll allow you your space and allow you to grow in your way. But also to say, I trust you. And I'll show you I trust you. And I hope one day you'll trust me and show me that you trust me. Because it's no coincidence that you say when you believe in someone, it means you trust them in a way. Right? If you believe in God, you should trust in God. Right? And sometimes it takes time to develop trust. So, you have a different part of God's creation. You say, at this point, oh, okay, you're doing some interesting things. I don't agree with that. But I'm going to give you the time to grow so that I can trust you. Right? And that goes back again to that principle, for example, of criminals. If you've shown that you can't be in society right now, okay, we're going to take you out of society. We're going to put you in jail. But we're going to give you hope and the chance to grow. It's not necessarily about punishing you for doing a crime, although, there should be punishments for doing horrible things. But saying, we'll give you hope. We're punishing you here. You're going to be aside. And it's also to protect all of society. Because obviously you haven't grown to a place where we can trust you. And where you can trust us, too. Right? So, as the larger part of the community, we have to put you in jail right now. But we'll give you hope and time to grow. So think about things, learn about things, grow. Jail doesn't have to be a horrible place. It's more like a place of isolation. You have your space. We'll leave you your space. But for now, you need to be separated. And when you're ready to trust us, and when we're ready to trust you, we can basically come closer. You can reintegrate society with us. And hopefully you'll have grown and we won't have to go through this process again. Life is complicated. Look at everything that's happening, all the movement that's happening in one city, just one city, for example, at every given moment. Life is complicated. Right? But we have to learn to love life. And loving life, loving ourselves, also means allowing us to love others. Trusting ourselves, right? Learning to trust others. And trust takes time to develop. Like a child who walks for the first time. At the beginning, they're not trusting their own legs in a sense, right? They're hesitant, right? It takes time to trust even ourselves at the beginning. When you're walking, for example. But with time, we grow. And with growth, hopefully we can learn to trust ourselves. And to trust others. Thanks for listening.